All right, thank you all for staying with us today. We have two more exciting sessions. The next one we have in here, track 2, is navigating cyber threats to protect your data in your organization. Andre Pienaar, who is the founder of C5, is going to be the moderator. Andre is a cybersecurity expert, a member of the White House Historical Association, a director for the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and a trustee of the David Shepard Wildlife Foundation. Please welcome Andre and his panel.
Well, it's wonderful to see such a great turnout for this very important and very topical panel that we have this afternoon. Our theme is data theft turning to data manipulation, which is sounds like a very serious theme. But the topic that we are discussing today, we want to make very practical and very relevant to all the not-for-profit organizations and all the charitable organizations that are represented in the conference today. And we have the great privilege of a highly skilled, highly experienced panel today of both cybersecurity experts, cloud computing experts, and not-for-profit leaders who've had experience of this issue, who would like to share their experience with you. So the format for our discussion is going to be, I'm going to introduce my colleagues by asking them to say a few words about themselves. And then I'm going to ask them to make their remarks. Then we will have a discussion picking up some of the points from their remarks, and then we'll open up the discussion for questions and answers from the floor. And again, we'd like to make this discussion as practical as possible so that everyone who participates in this section can have some takeaways that you can take back to your organization to improve your cybersecurity. Now, often I get asked the question also in my role as a director or a trustee of charitable organizations, why does cybersecurity matter? And this terrific conference, the Imagine Conference, is all about the potential of the new digital world that we are building and all the innovation opportunities that cloud computing is opening up for us. When I started my career in cybersecurity in the 90s, and now I'm telling you how old I am, the internet had about 15 million users, and today we have more than 3.5 billion people connected to the internet, and probably 9.5 billion plus devices, and that's about to double over the next few years. So a very exciting digital world that's being built, the first global public common, and tremendous good flowing from this. But at the pace and at the scale at which we've been growing this and expanding this, there are also risks. And so our panel is all about how do you manage those risks in a practical way to protect your mission, your donors, and your cause. And unfortunately, not-for-profit organizations have become the target of hackers. In the last few years, we've had some very high-profile hacks of not-for-profit organizations, including the very high-profile hacking of the National Center for Statistics on not-for-profit organizations that got hacked in 2015 with the details of more than 700,000 charities compromised at the time. So this is a very serious and topical issue, and we want to speak to you about it in a very practical day. So I'm going to ask my colleagues here on the panel to introduce themselves to you and just to say a few words about their own background. Can I start with Jamil Jaffer from IronNet Cybersecurity?
Sure. So my name is Jamil Jaffer. I'm a vice president for strategy and business development at IronNet Cybersecurity, which is a startup technology firm founded by General Keith Alexander, the former director of the U.S. National Security Agency and the founding commander of U.S. Cyber Command. We do network threat defense. As far as my background, I'll admit to being a recovering lawyer. I am a tech nerd, though. I remember my first computer. Andrew, you're talking a little bit about the history of computers. I had a Tandy TRS-80 color computer. When we upgraded that computer from 4K to 16K of onboard RAM, the Rainbow Computer Club was shocked and amazed. What are you going to do with 16K of RAM? So I've been doing computers my whole life. I paid my way through college doing computer support, running network cable, 10-base-T cable through ceilings down at UCLA. But in my day-to-day life, I can't seem to keep a job. I've had jobs in the federal government, from the Justice Department to the White House, working on cybersecurity issues, on Capitol Hill at the House Intelligence Committee, Senate Foreign Relations Committee, typically in national security capacities. And so My hope today is to talk to you a little bit about the threat that we face and why it matters so much to nonprofit corporations.
William Kilmer from ITC Security.
My name is William Kilmer. I'm the Executive Chairman at ITC Secure. ITC Secure is a managed security services provider, which is a fancy way of saying that we're an organization that helps you actually manage your security. We are an organization that works with other organizations, with enterprises, with government, with nonprofit organizations, and we help consult to advise you of your security risks, as well as we will actually step in and essentially assume the role of a managed security workforce for you, where we'll manage your network security and integrity. My background is in cybersecurity. I've spent about 18 years in cybersecurity and data analytics, either as an investor or as a CEO or executive inside several different companies, and have worked on multiple different technologies around cybersecurity, including malware detection, intrusion detection applications, and data analytics-based solutions.
I now want to turn to Greg Miller from the OSET Institute. Greg, you're a not-for-profit leader. How do you feel sitting with all these geeks?
Well, fortunately, and Jamil, thank you for being the one to break the ice on admissions, because I too am a recovering lawyer, in addition to still being a software engineer.
We're stuck on the 12-step program. We're still apologizing to people for all the bad stuff we did when we were lawyers.
Step 4 is a very difficult one.
There you go.
But yes, thanks for joining us this afternoon. I'm one of you, in the sense that I'm the Chief Operating Officer and co-founder of the OSET Institute. We're a very odd and unique duck, and perhaps the poster child for case study up here today, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. But what's unique about our nonprofit is that we are actually building election technology. So we are cutting the code of the soul of a new machine that's public technology, to help foster rejuvenation of that industry, to get us more verifiable, accurate, secure, and transparent elections someday. It's kind of innovation that just is absent in this industry because there's no commercial incentive to do so. So on the one hand, we're definitely a public benefit corporation with an enormous social benefit of increasing confidence in elections and their outcomes. On the other hand, our hope is our work will catalyze an industry that needs to commercially deliver, because that won't be us. So on the one hand, we have all the same problems you do. We have some unique ones I'll speak to in a moment. By way of background, about 3 decades in the tech sector, a lot of it in product engineering and management, and then IP law for a period of time, before we founded this project about 11 years ago. And because I'm one of them, and we had talked about this earlier, you were going to ask some questions for context about who may have some responsibilities like I have. So I'll leave that to Andre to ask you, but it'll help us to understand who we're speaking with in the audience. But for me, I have some direct responsibility for the integrity and security of the data that comprises our institution, as well as the work product of that institution, the actual benefit.
Last but not least, Rajat Varuni, who's a cybersecurity specialist from AWS.
Hello, good afternoon, welcome. My name is Rajat. I work as a security architect at AWS Professional Services. My main job involves actually designing, crafting security solutions for federal agencies, such that the risk of attack from either layer 7 or denial of service or even data leakage can be prevented, right? And lately I've been involved with actually designing encryption methodologies to actually protect data at rest and in transit. Thank you.
So as you can see, we've got a tremendous panel of expertise and experience here. And as Greg said, we'd love to see how many of you have responsibility for cybersecurity in your organization, or know that in your organization someone holds this important responsibility. Well, that's a terrific show of hands.
Yay.
And I'm sure we're going to have a very interesting discussion. I'm now going to ask Jamil. Jamil, IronNet Cybersecurity is a leader in network traffic analysis. So you guys see all the bad stuff that can creep in on networks. How do you see the threat environment at the moment, and in particular for not-for-profit organizations?
Well, Andre, I mean, overall, I think the reality is that we are at war in cyberspace today. And if we're not at war in cyberspace, we're on the edge of war. What I mean by that is we've increasingly seen actors in cyberspace, primarily nation states in this area, actually undertaking activities that have warlike connotations, kinetic effects. We've seen in the case of North Korea and Iran, actual destructive attacks against American private corporations, destroying data and destroying computer systems, making them bricked. Right? And this is not recent. This is going back years, back to the Las Vegas Sands Corporation and going back to the Sony Pictures Corporation. People think about Sony, they think of the disclosure of those movies and the emails from executives. But what also happened there, the North Koreans, they destroyed computer systems. They made them inoperable. They destroyed data, in addition to making some of the data public. And this is a new trend. We have seen cyber actors for a long time, China predominantly, stealing intellectual property out from under our private sector companies and creating an economic base inside of China that's built on American intellectual property. They don't have to make the investment in intellectual property if they can steal ours. There's a reason why a Huawei router looks a lot like a Cisco router. It's because it basically is a Cisco router. Now, we've seen these trends, and we've seen this increasing trend in the direction of destructive activity when it comes to nation states. The same is true, the same trend, not necessarily destructive activity, but the same trend in terms of increasing capabilities and willingness to act and act more aggressively is true when it comes to hackers and to criminal groups. And we often see now nation states employing criminal groups as cat's paws for nation state activity when the nation states want to avoid their hand being detected. So we have now sort of in a lot of ways a convergence of activists, hacktivists, ordinary sort of run-of-the-mill hackers, criminal groups, organized criminal groups, including out of Russia and Eastern Europe, and nation states all acting in this space and all getting better, faster, and more aggressive. And we're seeing a transfer of nation-state capabilities to some of these outside groups. So the threat is increasing dramatically, and as a result, we as a nation, and when I say a nation, I don't just mean the government, I mean as a nation in terms of our corporations, our companies, our nonprofits, are very much under a sustained, constant state of cyber attack. Now, that attack may not always result in destruction or manipulation, but it is a very real piece of it. We've seen the various obvious activities that Russia's conducted now with respect to our elections. These are activities designed specifically to create dissent and to undermine confidence in our democratic institutions. So we see nation states and various groups undertaking activities designed to influence the way we think about things, the way we interpret data, the way we interpret information, and the way we utilize it, and maybe sometimes make it impossible for us to utilize data information by making our systems inoperable. Now, why does this matter to nonprofits, right? You all are out there doing good in the world. You're creating benefits for average people. You're stabilizing democracy. You're creating a net benefit. Why would anybody hate you and hate you to the point of coming after you? You may not have a ton of intellectual property, or at least what you think of as core intellectual property, but one, you do have a ton of intellectual property, right? The things, the programs you're creating, the skills you're building in human beings, the donors you have, all of that is the lifeblood of your nonprofit corporations, and all of it, every single piece of it, is almost certainly at risk because you're on your iPhone, you're on your laptop, you're out there in the world raising money, talking to folks, and all those systems are exploitable. And so the threat that, and at the end of the day, you may even be more vulnerable than the average corporation because your resources are focused on doing good, not on protecting yourself and not necessarily on protecting your data. And to the extent you are spending money on that, it's taking away from mission. And none of you are in this business to make money. You're in there to do the mission and to succeed that mission. At the same time, your ability to successfully carry out your mission, particularly when you're doing the kind of good that might trouble some people. So for those of you supporting democracy in the third world, there are a lot of nation states and criminal groups that don't want to see democracy or freedom activities in those third world countries because they benefit from corruption and entrenched powers. So you are a threat to them. You may not think of yourself as a threat to them, but you know deep down in your heart of hearts, the reason you're doing this job is to be a threat to them. And so whether you're building hospitals or building democracy institutions or supporting positive activities in any part of the world, there is a constituency of people. And they may be non-do-gooders on the other side. Let's say you're Greenpeace. Somebody mentioned Greenpeace when we were in our prep session, right? If you're Greenpeace, there are a lot of people in this world who don't like what you're doing. And so for each of you, there may be that very group. And the question is, do they have cyber capabilities, and do they plan to bring them up against you? And the truth of that scenario, to me at least from where I sit, the answer is almost certainly yes. And why? Because it's cheap. It's easy. no matter whether they're organized or not, they can obtain access to the information, they can obtain access to the tools, they can at a very low cost, obtain the ability to manipulate you and your operations. And it doesn't have to be the kind of manipulation where your data is disappearing or your computer's being bricked or your data's walking out the back door. It can simply be a slight change in the way you understand the data that's being presented about your customers, your consumers, the people you serve. And that modification of the data as you understand it can dramatically affect the programs you deliver. And so, for better or for worse, what I'm saying is it's a bad situation for us collectively as a nation, as a global community. It's an even more challenging situation for you all, and particularly in a situation when you're resource constrained and focused on mission.
Jamil, thank you for that, for those very interesting insights. William, ITC Secure help other organizations with their cybersecurity and also often manage the cybersecurity for organizations. What do you think not-for-profit organizations can do to mitigate their cyber risk?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. First of all, I think you can heed Jamil's words because this really is a significant situation. I think Jamil, when he talks about this being a war, this is not, I think, a hyperbole in any way. From what we've seen, I mean, there is active campaigns that are out there on a day-to-day basis with motivations that, for a lot of people, they may not see the connection, but there are connections there that are driving a lot of this activity. And those activities can be to really shut down, as Jamil had talked about, the democratic process, cut down on the goodwill that's being done, the social benefits that are being transferred into the market today, and that's enough. I'm old enough and I've been around long enough to have seen the wave of motivations change over the years. From early on, there was a huge reputational factor around hacking. The people were just interested in hacking websites, defacing them. It was a badge of honor to be able to say that you were able to hack somebody's website. Then turned into this financial motivation for a long time carried that. But there are only so many large enterprises out there with deep pockets that people could go after. Now, it very much has changed towards this activist or this hacktivist role that is increasing in terms of its threat and capability. So you have to look at, I think, first of all, as an organization, what's potentially at threat for you. And it really, from my perspective, comes down to something that's very similar to what we see on the for-profit side, which is trust. All of you have probably been involved or have seen an organization that that has had its trust somehow compromised by a hack. Any of you that have ever shopped at Target, which would probably be most of you today. Any of you have ever taken a ride in an Uber. Those of you know that your information, in all likelihood, has been leaked out because of the lack of trust or because of a violation within those organizations. Those same things, that same impact that you see with those organizations where you may be more likely to shop somewhere else or to take an alternative to riding in a rideshare platform, those are what affect you today. And there have been very specific issues out there where donor lists have gotten out in the public domain. In some ways, they have impacted those individuals because their information has gotten out. And again, people may be donating to you and may consider that they're doing something for public good, that they're doing something of public benefit. But if that information gets into the wrong hands with people that have different interests or different aspirations, I actually know from experience in talking to individuals that their information has been out and it's been compromised, and because of it, and because of the association that they've had with a particular charity, they've had repercussions with their employers, with businesses that they've dealt with because of their connection with a particular organization. So there's some very significant issues there. The other that I would say, just to maybe spread the fear, uncertainty, and doubt a little bit, is especially for organizations that are here in the U.S. Ironically, many of you may or may not be aware of the GDPR laws, which is the General Data Protection laws that have been instituted in Europe. Even if you are a U.S.-based charity, if you deal at all with information from people who are outside of the country, who are based in Europe, you may be subject to the legislation and the restrictions around personally identifiable information. And that could include, with a violation of those policies, fines that can be imposed. So there are certain things that you need to have in place for that. So now that we've kind of covered the fear side and driven that home a little bit, what could you do as an organization? That's really where we come in as ITC Secure. Our focus is on two elements. But at the basis of it all, we help organizations who don't have much technical knowledge around security to improve their security capabilities. So we do that in two ways. Number one, we help people to understand where their security risk is. We advise them, we'll go in and look at the organization and help them to understand where their risks may be and be able to advise them on how they can actually change that and improve their risk posture. Interestingly enough, a lot of times when we're advising organizations or we're hired by an organization, they expect us to go in and look at the technology. First and foremost, they want us to go in and look at their network, their connections, how they may interface with other networks, where their data is stored, et cetera. That's only a small fraction of what we do. We look at all aspects of the organization and try to determine across basically 3 platforms. Talking to Greg before, he was talking about 5, and I'm sure he'll touch on those. But we look at 3 main things: technology, people, and process or governance. What kind of rules are in place? And those are the key areas that we look at as we help to advise organizations. And then on our managed security side, what we essentially do is come in and help to manage the network itself. So we are able to use software in order to monitor the network. We monitor the activity, the traffic that's coming across the network, look at what's coming inside of the network, how it's coming in. We look at certain triggers or attempts to be able to access information. And essentially, in real time, we act as your eyes and ears looking at your network and helping you to understand if there's an issue, and then helping you to remediate that or to solve it when there is one. So this is a critical issue that we see in the market today, not just because we're in this business, but with this simple fact. There are today there's a differential of about 1 million open positions between the available headcount or the available technology expertise. People like Rajat, who are here, who have great technological understanding, and the number of jobs that are open. There are about 1 million people short today worldwide of people who have the right technical skills. And that's where we come in. If you look at 4 to 5 years from now, that will be an estimated 2 million or more positions that we'll have a shortfall in over the next few years. So the reality is that we're all dealing with less resources than we'd like. We have less people with good technical skills, and that's really where we come in, is to help fill that gap.
William, terrific. That's very helpful to know that there are places where you can go to get good advice and also to outsource your cybersecurity and leave it in safe and competent hands. Greg, you're at the front line of this in leading your not-for-profit organization, both as a not-for-profit, but also because of the very special mission that the OSET Institute has. Do you want to give us your perspective as both as a not-for-profit leader, but also someone whose mission is closely related to veracity, integrity,
Sure.
And the very important point that William and Jamil has raised about preserving trust?
Sure, absolutely. And so I want to remind everybody again that I'm actually one of you as Chief Operating Officer. I'm on the hook for what happens in our organization with these regards. And I would submit that because of some of the groups that we interact with, Get Out the Vote, Good Governments, and things like that, the problems that you raised on a global basis of nation state apply domestically as well. There's a lot of domestic activity, and so don't think that just because you don't do things across the pond that you're safe from this. 240 hours ago, when I agreed to become a part of this thing, we were talking in the phrases of what if. Today, we are what is. In the last 240 hours, we have gone from speculating that somebody might give a heck about what we're doing to actually begin poking, prodding, and perhaps penetrating, to now knowing, thanks to the FBI and others, that we are actually a target of considerable interest with a group in St. Petersburg. So it started simply enough of us one day realizing that A good portion of our social media following on Twitter disappeared because they decided to start cleaning out accounts. And we suddenly realized, oh, the people that were following us weren't people that we necessarily wanted following us. One thing led to another, and before we knew it, we understood that within our infrastructure, which is entirely outsourced as it should be, that we are a subject of surveillance from a foreign state, simply because we represent a disruption to the status quo. So bear in mind that their success in any penetration of the US electoral system is predicated on everything being the way it is and staying the way it is, inherently vulnerable. If there's any project out there, or any prospect of a project that might be introducing technology or processes or anything that changes that, apparently that's of more interest to them than we ever surmised. Now, like you, we have donor data. Like you, we have outbound communications and other marketing data. So like you, we have data that we need to sort of keep track of so it isn't defaced, if you will, or disrupted, or God forbid, donor data gets out and someone decides to weaponize that content. Unlike most of you, though, we have a work product that in of itself is an intellectual property, it's an intangible asset, it's software source code. So in addition to, like you, I hope, relying on AWS's infrastructure, we have a lot of other external services. So GitHub, for those of you who are familiar with where the world of public technology and open source code lives, right? Enterprise applications provided by another cloud provider. We have 2 different content management services and systems that maintain websites, external. So we have a collection of things that we have to take care of. If I can suggest anything to you from our learning, and bear in mind that we're a unique group in that the 48 some odd people that we have, we all come from the tech sector, all very deeply experienced. So when I say this, I say it with confidence and you can depend upon it. Make certain you have a managed service provider protecting that infrastructure that you rely on, AWS, right? So AWS gives you all the strength and you certainly will touch on this, to ensure that the infrastructure you live on is secure. But the data and the operations and the things inside that cloud are up to you. So we ourselves, as technologists, to a certain extent are self-managed MSP, but I can't emphasize enough the importance of having professionals help you. You don't want to get that call from the FBI and act clue-free about it. So we think that's very, very important. We operate in a ecosystem we call a 5 Ps model. Within our world, there are people, process, platform, policy, and politics. As I've thought about it today, it occurs to me that all of you, if you think about it, live in that same sort of 5 Ps ecosystem. So you have to examine each of those things. The biggest learning for us in all of this is that it's not going to be a piece of technology that takes us out. It's going to be a slip-up of somebody in a human error. The humans are the weakest link here. So you don't all have to become digital security experts. They're here to help you with that. But you really ought to understand what are the people and process issues inside your organization, because what's going to take you down is a spearfish. What's going to take you down is a simple piece of email that somebody errantly opens when they shouldn't have. So there are things that you can do starting this afternoon to think about how your organization exists and how you operate in this new world of the digital realm. So that's our learning about it. And as our conversation goes, other things will come up. I'll be glad to try to address them.
Greg, really appreciate you sharing your experience with us firsthand. Rajat, when we started investing in cybersecurity and C5 as a venture capital firm, many people had a concern about the cloud as a potential blocker for cybersecurity. And over the last few years, we've seen a complete shift in view from CISOs saying, well, being in the AWS cloud actually means I'm a whole lot safer. What does AWS do to help build the cybersecurity of not-for-profits?
Thanks for asking, Andre. And but as of today, we have several thousand nonprofit agencies across the globe running on AWS. But as mentioned before, this is a two-pronged approach. We actually at AWS think about this as a shared security model, where AWS provides security of the cloud, and it's the customer's responsibility to actually secure the data that they provide in the cloud. What I mean by that is that security of the cloud, meaning AWS provides the security of all the from the VMware, from the virtual machine to the, from the virtual machine will up to the physical layer will itself. Whereas, if you will actually put any data on the physical machine, on the virtual machine, then it's your responsibility. And in terms of that, we actually have several services, but such as AWS WAF, which will actually protects against common layer 7 attacks, such as cross-site scripting, SQL injection, or HTTP floods. As well as we have services such as Guard Duty. They actually provide alerting and monitoring mechanism for intrusion detection systems itself. But as well as, let's just say, even if you want to encrypt your data, we have a service called AWS KMS, Key Management Service, such that you can design your own custom encryption solutions for both data at rest as well as in transit. So these are some of the services, building block services that one could actually leverage to actually have a secure system deployed. And one more thing I don't want to, but I do want to mention is that in order to prevent data leakage, we also have one more service called Amazon Macie that can actually help protect your identify classify data as well as alert if there is any data leakage.
Let me just say that for us, a user of AWS, what that means is that the hardware, the data servers, the connection up to the internet and all that, that's all taken care of for us. We don't have any machines with cables snaking across the ground into a closet. We've outsourced all that onto the cloud. What we are responsible for is the data and the information that's inside of those services. So I count on him to make certain that all of their hardware is safe and protected. And then we have to rely on folks like Bill to ensure that the data and the information and the services that generate from that are what is being managed and taken care of.
Terrific. Well, I want to, I'm going to ask the panelists a question or two, but I want to start off by opening up the discussion to the floor and seeing whether there are any questions from the floor to our panelists.
Hi. Kristy Kaufman, I run the Code of Support Foundation, which is a veteran support nonprofit, and this is kind of to Bill and Rajat. So we've developed a cloud-based resource navigation platform called Patriot Link, and it's a pre-populated platform so that the biggest problem in the space isn't that there's not the resources, nobody knows where they are, no one can get from them. So that's what it's supposed to solve. So we're talking to the VA about potentially getting Patriot Link upstream in the transition process. So when 250 million service members transition every year, they would sign into Patriot Link, start looking for resources where they were actually moving, and then the VA gets the data in the back end of the demographics of, hey, they're going here, they're searching for this is who they are. So, of course, we use AWS. In entering into some kind of contract with the VA as a nonprofit, it's a little bit interesting situation, which you probably know about. So we're trying to figure that part out. I think we're fine on the AWS side because they seem to be okay with that level of security. The content side and protecting, there's really no PHI in here. It's just actual names and emails. That part we really don't have a strategy for. So can you give me some advice on even just developing a strategy for that kind of relationship? Because we're pretty small, and if this happens, it's going to get big really fast, and I don't want to be behind the 8 ball so that we're not ready for it.
Is there a contact-based form where they will actually put in the names and stuff? Or
yeah, so the idea is they're developing something called a community resource workshop module to put into this transition process. So it's usually a 5-day process that this transitioning service member goes through.
Okay.
So Department of Labor does a couple days, and the VA and so the VA is developing this workshop. So the idea is the service member would come in, put in their email, put in their name, tell us what branch of service, but nothing beyond that.
Okay, so, well, thanks for that. Serverless is the way to go. So what I would suggest is that, but if your backend is running on DynamoDB, where you would have is the first name, last name, email addresses of those respective people, and then the front end, your website would actually be hosted on S3, right? So that way, end-to-end security, you can also encrypt data at rest as well as in transit. not just with like S3, but also on DynamoDB as well. And you can also do column level, this like encryption too. So I think, that would be the suggestion.
So Rajat's going to be available after the panel. We're going to have a deeper dive with him on these technical questions. But I think this is exactly what cloud is about. It enables a not-for-profit, regardless of your size, to leapfrog to the next opportunity. And I think Rajat sort of touched on the beginnings of what the solution could be, but perhaps you can have a discussion after the panel. Just
More than happy to.
To do a deeper dive, because it sounds like a really important question you've got to solve.
And Bill, did you have anything?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly can't add anything technically beyond what Rajat has already spoken about. But just to reiterate something that he had said earlier, there is only so far that Amazon can actually help you in terms of security. Everything from the hypervisor up is your responsibility. And some of the things that Rajat had talked about before, SQL injections, cross-site scripting, right? That's not Amazon's responsibility. The issue that we run into today, especially with the global IT shortage that we have, and in particular security, is we have more and more individuals that are learning to code, they're learning to develop websites, but for example, they're not taking proper security precautions. So as well as Amazon has developed their structure, if you end up with somebody who's a web developer who doesn't know about, for example, SQL injections, and they've developed the code in a way that allows somebody to do a SQL injection and get access to your database through the website. I mean, that is such a key issue. It's such a basic element, but something that you really have to pay attention to with the software developers, with those who are developing websites.
I think you pick up a very important point, William, which is that increasingly it's important to diligence the people who are helping you, diligence their skill sets, diligence their own cybersecurity, have a look at their cybersecurity policies and controls so that you make sure that the people who are helping you actually know what they're doing.
I'll just add that just to put some context on for us, one of our largest consumers of our technology is an organization called Rock the Vote. And so we have engineers on our team who are dedicated to managing that database and those connections and whatnot. And again, I'm going to say that Rajat gave you some ideas about some tools and some services. It's going to be an organization like Bill's that's going to help you figure out how to wire that together and then ensure the provenance of that data and the stewardship of those services.
And
Yeah,
you should
that's really
you should
helpful.
build into your contract, right, the security architects and the engineers you need to ensure that data stays secure with you.
Yeah, so we're
That's a
fortunate
huge
that-
point too, right? Because Dan talked this morning about overhead. We are the overhead, right? In all of your planning, you better be thinking about, in terms of overhead, you've got to cover these costs to do it right.
So we got this $1 million grant from the Bristol-Myers Squibb Foundation that allowed us to move to Noblis, which is a very capable developer and does a lot of work with the government. So I think we're okay with the actual source code, and I mean, we've built the platform with them. So I think it's a combination of all of you guys that I need to talk to, basically, after that.
My wife works at Noblis, or used to work at Noblis, so it's a good buy.
Amr, the chairman, has been amazing.
Amr's a great guy.
Yeah.
Great. Any other questions?
This is a question for Gregory, but feel free for any of you guys to step in. But I was just wondering, how do Twitter accounts lead to attacks on OSET and what they want to do to change?
So that was a signal to us that there was some folks, trolling us, if you will, that we didn't realize and recognize that were trolling us, and that sort of increased our peripheral vision, which you can't have enough of in this game, right? So that was a signal to us that, perhaps this might be something we should be taking a look at. So that was merely an indication, right? And so I would say to you that if you're a project that you suddenly find yourself with a lot of interesting accounts trolling you, you might want to think about why that is and what else they might be doing.
Okay, that's a great answer. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yeah. Unfortunately, in life, many of the bad things that can happen to you gets preceded by surveillance. And the same thing applies to cybersecurity. Often before hackers strike, they really watch and surveil an organization for its habits, its connectors, its influencers, its staff, and then they concoct a plan before they do the actual hack. Any other questions? There's a gentleman there at the back.
So I'm creating a platform that connects corporations with students. And it was kind of what you were talking about, how we have this skills gap, and trying to fill this and also create a place where students can find out what they want to do for their careers. One of the aspects of this is that you would have a lot of student data of minors, and that's kind of a slippery slope, and I'm wondering if any of you have dealt with that. Is that something that people try to stay away from? Is it something that can be secure?
Yes, so I think I mentioned the use of the service AWS WAF, Web Application Firewall. Within that, there is actually one of the rules that one could write such that you could actually prevent people from scraping your website. Yeah. Okay. So but instead, let's just say that but if you don't want to write that, then you could actually deploy a pre-configured cloud formation template that has that rule built in. Maybe after this I can show you how.
Okay.
Yeah. I love how practical the questions are. I think you raise a very important issue. I think many not-for-profit organizations deal with sensitive personal information, and privacy has become as important as cybersecurity. I know that Maura Hart is here from the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and ICMIC runs the only global database of missing children worldwide, and deals with the same challenge. So perhaps Maura, someone you should connect to, also can share with you the ICMIC experience. We only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to turn to our panelists just to give us a wrap-up remark.
Well, look, I think that you guys have a unique challenge ahead of you. You're resource constrained, you're trying to do important things in the world, and yet, as was laid out here, the threat is real. And you have sensitive data. You have data of minors, you have data of veterans, personally identifiable information. And at the end of the day, I think the most important thing is that it's about trust, right? Your relationship with your consumers, the people you serve, and your donors is all about the fact they trust you. The donors are giving you money because they expect you to spend it in good ways. Your clients come to you because they know you're trying to do good in the world and do good for them and benefit them. The day that trust is decayed, whether it's by a hack of emails that were untoward that happen to be in your databases, or of their information, or of your donors' information, the day that trust is compromised, or you're acting under information that doesn't work and your programs aren't delivered and aren't effective, the day that trust in your own systems, whether it's your trust or your consumer's trust or your donor's trust, is the day your business is almost unviable. And so this is an important thing. Yes, cybersecurity can be a spend. Yes, cybersecurity is difficult. It's not easy to do. It requires a level of perhaps technological sophistication. But there are opportunities. As Rajat has laid out, the cloud presents an opportunity to do unique and different things and leverage infrastructure that you don't have to build yourself and that you don't have to deploy on yourself, that you could deploy on and know that at least that piece of it, that part is taken care of. And the cloud benefits providers like us. We built our system for big corporations and people who have the money to spend on an expensive surveillance system. At the same time, we're currently in the process of building into the AWS marketplace so we can sell to small consumers. Because you can protect all the big energy companies in the world, but it won't matter if all the small rural electric companies get hacked too. Right? And same way, you can serve all the big corporations, but if nonprofits that actually make change happen in the world are being hacked, it doesn't matter that all these companies are making big money because we're not going to be able to rely on our very own democratic institutions that service our country. And so you're doing important good work out there. Don't let that work go to waste because you haven't spent the time and energy and gone through that hard, difficult process of figuring out where am I vulnerable and what do I have to do to fix that.
Very good. I think if I could leave you with one thing today, it would be to go back to what I talked about that we do, particularly on our consulting side. When we work with organizations, we talk to them about people, processes, and technology. We spent a lot of time talking about technology today, but you'll notice that I put those in a particular order, with people first. And the reality is that as we talk about the technology is just a fraction of your cybersecurity. And the reality is today, about 80% of all of the cyber threats that happen are internal to your network. It's generally an internal actor. And when we say an internal actor, it is somebody who maybe has something misconfigured. They sent an email with information that they shouldn't have sent out. They provide information in some way. They click on an email that's a phishing attack that ends up infecting their system and causing a breach. So one of the most cost-effective things that you can do today is to just look at the people aspect of it first and foremost. Make sure that your employees have proper training. There are free phishing platforms out there where you can actually test your own people internally to make sure that they're not clicking on emails that they shouldn't. It's just training, policy, and making sure that people are following that process. So I would say, what you can do between now and your next budget cycle, where you can use services like ours, use services like Jamil and works with at IronNet, is you can work on the people side of it very cost effectively, and you can cover a lot of your needs.
Greg?
I'm just going to echo Bill's remarks here. I think that we should all really think about practicing safe cyber. I just really commend to your head to go ponder the word trust and how much of a quotient that is in what you do. And I'm going to yield the balance of my time to the moderator.
Yeah, well, I would say that, but after having your AWS account opened, please contact your technical account manager or your account manager, so to speak, and then they will actually walk you through to actually get those AWS credits through TechSoup, or even apply for AWS grants, right? And there were several other new programs that were just announced this morning. So please do take advantage of that, and but including training as well at aws.training. Let me know how we can all help. Thank you.
I think we're ending on a very positive note with both Jamil and Bill and Rajat highlighting all the resources that are available to not-for-profit organizations. And as you heard from Rajat, you can contact your AWS account manager, and that there are a whole range of resources available at your disposal, and some of it on a pro bono basis from AWS to help you with this challenge. And I also know many cybersecurity organizations also are willing to help not-for-profits on a pro bono basis. So this is a challenge that can be managed, it's a challenge that can be met, and it is possible to complete your mission in a secure way. And thank you so much for your interest. We've really enjoyed the conversation.